Hey, stop scrolling for a second. What you're about to hear happened at one of the most expensive parties in Boston. And by the time it ended, a woman worth nothing on paper had brought a billionaire to his knees. Not with money. Not with beauty. With ice, blood, and a memory nobody thought was still alive. Stay with me. You won't believe how this one ends. Welcome back, everyone. Before we start, tell me in the comments, which country are you watching from tonight? I love seeing where this community reaches. Tonight's story is one of the most emotional ones we've ever told. A story about cruelty hidden behind diamonds, and kindness hidden behind an apron. I promise you, the twist in this one is going to stay with you long after the video ends. Let's begin. Nobody in that ballroom knew her name. Amara Whitfield had worked at the Hartwell estate for exactly 11 months, and in that time, she had learned one unshakable rule. The staff exists to be invisible. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not make eye contact with the guests. You do not exist in photographs. You are furniture with a pulse. It was New Year's Eve, and the Hartwell mansion in Newport, Rhode Island, was lit up like something out of a fairy tale nobody could afford to live in. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling. A live orchestra played somewhere near the grand staircase. Champagne flowed like it was tap water, and somewhere in that glittering crowd of 300 guests stood the man whose name was on every building downtown. Daniel Hartwell, 34 years old, self-made after inheriting a company on the edge of bankruptcy and turning it into an empire. Amara had seen him maybe 6 times since she started working there. He was polite to the staff in a distracted, distant way. The kind of politeness that comes from a man who has too much on his mind to be cruel, but too much power to ever really see the people around him. His fiancée was a different story entirely. Vanessa Cole had been engaged to Daniel for 8 months, and in that time she had fired 4 housekeepers, 2 chefs, and a driver. All for offenses so small they barely qualified as mistakes. A folded napkin the wrong way. Car 5 minutes late. A salad with too much dressing. Tonight, Amara's mistake was smaller than all of those combined. She had been carrying a tray of champagne glasses through the west hallway when Vanessa's cousin, Brittany, spun around too quickly on her heel, laughing at something, and collided directly into Amara's shoulder. 2 glasses shattered on the marble floor. A small splash of champagne landed on the hem of Vanessa's ivory gown. It wasn't Amara's fault. Everyone in that hallway saw it happen. But everyone in that hallway also knew better than to say so. Vanessa turned slowly, her eyes dropping to the tiny wet spot on her $3,000 dress, then rising to meet Amara's face with an expression that made the temperature in the hallway feel like it dropped 10 degrees. "Do you have any idea," Vanessa said, her voice sweet and venomous at the same time, "how much this dress cost?" "I'm so sorry, ma'am," Amara said quietly, already kneeling to pick up the broken glass with her bare hands. "It was an accident, Everything is always an accident with you people," Vanessa cut in. The hallway had gone quiet. A few guests had stopped to watch, the way people watch a car accident they know they shouldn't be enjoying. Vanessa's eyes drifted toward the grand ballroom, toward the centerpiece that had taken the event planners 3 days to design. An enormous sculpted ice block, nearly 50 pounds, carved in the shape of 2 swans forming a heart, meant to sit at the dessert table and slowly melt over the course of the night as a romantic symbol of the engagement. A slow, cruel smile spread across Vanessa's face. "You want to be useful," she said. "Fine. Be useful." She snapped her fingers at 2 of the event staff. "Bring the ice sculpture here. She's going to hold it all night. Since she's so clumsy with glass, maybe she can prove she can hold something heavier without dropping it." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Someone laughed nervously, unsure if this was a joke. It wasn't. Amara felt her stomach drop. "Ma'am, that's 50 pounds of ice. I don't think I can." "You'll manage," Vanessa said sharply. "Or you can find a new job tomorrow morning. Your choice." Amara looked around the hallway for help. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The other staff members stared at their shoes. Brittany, the cousin who had actually caused the spill, sipped her champagne and said nothing, her silence louder than any lie. Amara thought of her mother back in Providence, recovering from a knee surgery she couldn't afford without Amara's paycheck. She thought of her little brother's community college tuition, due in 3 weeks. She thought about how replaceable she was in this house, how easily forgotten. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered. What Amara didn't know, what nobody in that hallway knew, was that in less than 4 hours, the man whose name was on the deed to that mansion would walk through that same hallway and stop dead in his tracks at the sight of her face. 'Cause he had seen it before. A long time ago. In a photograph he still kept, folded inside his wallet, of the woman who had once saved his mother's life. The ice sculpture was wheeled out on a cart, and 2 of the event staff, visibly uncomfortable but too afraid of losing their jobs to object, lifted it into Amara's arms. The cold hit her instantly, a deep, aching cold that seemed to travel straight through her skin and into her bones. 50 pounds is heavy for anyone to hold for a few minutes. Vanessa intended for her to hold it for hours. "Stand right there," Vanessa instructed, pointing to a spot near the entrance of the ballroom, directly in the path of every arriving guest. "By the door. So everyone can see how careful we are with fragile things in this house." The cruelty of the placement wasn't lost on anyone who understood it. It wasn't just punishment. It was theater. Vanessa wanted an audience. For the first 20 minutes, Amara told herself she could do this. She shifted her weight, adjusted her grip, tried to distribute the ache evenly across her arms. She kept her eyes down, the way she'd trained herself to for 11 months, invisible even while being put on display. But guests noticed. Course they noticed. A woman in a maid's uniform, standing rigid by the ballroom entrance, arms wrapped around a slowly melting sculpture of ice, water dripping down her sleeves and pooling at her feet. It was impossible not to notice. Some guests looked away, uncomfortable, unwilling to get involved in whatever strange punishment they were witnessing. A few actually laughed, assuming it was some kind of eccentric party performance, a living statue for entertainment. One man even took a photo on his phone, chuckling to his date about how extra rich people's parties could get. Nobody asked if she was okay. By the 40th minute, Amara's fingers had gone from cold to numb to something that felt almost like burning. The strange paradox of frostbite, where enough cold starts to feel like fire. Her arms trembled from the sustained weight. The ice had begun melting steadily, water running down her wrists past her elbows, soaking into the sleeves of her uniform, dripping onto the marble floor in a widening puddle that someone would later have to mop up. Probably her after this was over, assuming her arms still worked. She thought about setting it down. Just for a second. Just to shake the feeling back into her hands. But Vanessa was watching from across the room, glass of champagne in hand, occasionally glancing over with a satisfied little smile, making sure the punishment was being properly endured. So Amara held on. She thought about her mother's face when she came home each week with just enough money to cover rent and groceries and a little extra toward medical bills. She thought about her brother, Marcus, 19 years old, the first in their family with a real shot at college, and how one missed paycheck could unravel everything they'd both been fighting for. She thought about her father who had passed 3 years ago and how he used to tell her, "Amara, some people will try to make you feel small so they can feel big. Don't you ever believe them." She held on to those words the way she was holding on to that ice, with everything she had left. By the 60th minute, her hands had started to bleed. Not from cuts, but from the skin cracking under the extreme cold, tiny fissures opening along her knuckles and the base of her fingers, small beads of red mixing with the melting water running down her arms. She didn't feel the pain anymore in the way you'd expect. It had become something duller, more distant, like her body was starting to protect her from the full truth of what was happening to it. That's when Brittany and another one of Vanessa's friends walked past, laughing about something unrelated, and one of them glanced at Amara, really looked at her, and saw the blood mixing with the water on the floor. "Oh my God," the friend said, not with concern, but with a kind of detached amusement, nudging Brittany. "Look, she's actually bleeding. This is insane." "She'll live," Brittany said, waving a hand dismissively. Vanessa said she has to hold it until it's completely melted. "Don't ruin the fun." They walked away laughing. Nobody stepped in. And that's when the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened, and Daniel Hartwell walked in from a business call he'd stepped out to take, glancing casually across the room the way a host does when checking that everything is running smoothly. His eyes landed on the woman by the entrance, the one soaked to the elbows, shaking, blood mixing with water at her feet. And his entire body went still, because he recognized her face. And it was a face he never thought he'd see again. Daniel Hartwell had been 14 years old when his family's first house, a modest 3-bedroom in Pawtucket, long before the empire, long before the name Hartwell meant anything, caught fire in the middle of the night. His mother, Elaine, had been trapped upstairs, overcome by smoke, unable to reach the stairs. His father was away on a work trip. Daniel, just a teenager, had frozen at the bottom of the staircase, paralyzed by fear and smoke, screaming for help that wasn't coming fast enough. A woman from 3 houses down, a stranger to the Hartwells at the time, a young nursing student who happened to be walking her dog late that night, saw the flames and didn't hesitate. She ran inside without a second thought, found Elaine collapsed near the bedroom door, and half-carried, half-dragged her down the smoke-filled stairs and out onto the front lawn, moments before the second floor collapsed. She never gave her name to the news crews that arrived afterward. She refused interviews. She simply checked that Elaine was breathing, gave a brief statement to the paramedics, and disappeared into the night before the Hartwells could properly thank her. Elaine Hartwell spent the rest of her life trying to track down that woman's identity, without success. She kept a single photograph, a blurry image someone had captured of the woman helping load Elaine into the ambulance, her face partially turned toward the camera, folded inside a small frame she kept on her nightstand until the day she passed away, 4 years ago, from cancer. Before she died, Elaine had made Daniel promise something. "If you ever see her," she whispered, gripping his hand, "if you ever find the woman who saved my life, you make sure she knows what she did for this family. You make sure she's never forgotten again." Daniel had carried a copy of that photograph in his wallet ever since. Not because he expected to ever actually find her in a city of millions, in a state that wasn't even the one he lived in now, but because it was the last promise he'd made to his mother, and some promises don't get to expire just because they're difficult to keep. He had looked at that photograph so many times over the years that the woman's face, young, determined, smoke-streaked but calm under pressure, was burned into his memory more clearly than most people he saw every day. Which is exactly why, standing in the doorway of his own engagement gala, watching a soaked and shivering maid hold a 50-pound block of ice with bleeding hands, Daniel Hartwell felt the entire room tilt sideways. Because underneath 11 months of a maid's uniform, underneath 20 years of aging, underneath a face drawn tight with pain and cold, it was her. The eyes were the same. The set of her jaw when she was determined not to break was the same. Even the small scar above her left eyebrow, visible now that her hair was slightly damp and pushed back from her face, matched exactly the photograph he had looked at 1,000 times. His mother's rescuer. The woman he had spent years quietly, hopelessly hoping to find. Standing in his own home, bleeding, because of the woman he was about to marry. For a moment, Daniel didn't move. He couldn't. His mind was trying to process 2 realities crashing into each other: the miracle of finally finding her, and the horror of the condition she was in. Then his legs started moving before his brain had even fully caught up, cutting straight across the crowded ballroom, past guests who called out congratulations he didn't hear, past his own fiancée who was laughing with friends near the dessert table, utterly unaware that the ground beneath her perfect engagement party was about to crack open. "Put that down," Daniel said, his voice low but carrying the kind of authority that silenced conversations within a 10-foot radius. "Right now. Someone get her a blanket." Now. Amara, startled by the sudden urgency in his voice, nearly dropped the sculpture. 2 staff members rushed forward to take it from her trembling arms, and the moment the weight left her, her knees buckled slightly. Her body finally allowed to register just how much it had endured. Daniel caught her before she hit the floor. And as he looked down at her face, this close, there was no mistaking it anymore. "It's you," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "You're the woman who saved my mother." The entire ballroom had gone silent. Every conversation had stopped. Every head had turned. And across the room, Vanessa's smile finally began to fade. Amara stared up at Daniel Hartwell, her mind foggy from cold and exhaustion, trying to make sense of what he'd just said. I don't understand," she managed, her teeth chattering. "I've never met you before tonight." 20 years ago, Daniel said, kneeling beside her now, ignoring the 300 guests watching in stunned silence. "A house fire in Pawtucket. A woman pulled my mother out before the second floor collapsed. She never told us her name. She just left." His voice cracked. "My mother spent the rest of her life trying to find her. She kept a photo of you until the day she died." Amara's breath caught. She remembered that night. Of course she remembered it. How could she ever forget the smell of smoke, the heat of the flames against her back as she pulled a stranger down a burning staircase, the sound of a teenage boy screaming from the front lawn? She had been 19 at the time, a nursing student walking her dog late at night, running on pure instinct with no thought for her own safety. She had never given her name because, in the chaos and adrenaline of that night, it hadn't occurred to her that it mattered. She had done what needed to be done, made sure the woman was breathing, and left before the news crews could turn her into something she never wanted to be. A headline, a hero, a story. She had gone home, showered off the smoke, and gone to class the next morning like nothing had happened, because in her mind, nothing extraordinary had. She had simply done what anyone should do. She had no idea that the family she'd helped that night would one day become one of the wealthiest families in New England. She had no idea that the terrified teenage boy on that lawn had grown into the man now kneeling in front of her, disbelief and gratitude written across his face in equal measure. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know it was you. I didn't know any of this." "You saved my mother's life," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion he was no longer trying to hide. "And tonight in my own house you were treated like this." He turned then, slowly, and looked across the ballroom at Vanessa, whose face had gone pale, her champagne glass forgotten in her hand. "Vanessa," he said, his voice now carrying an edge that hadn't been there in the 8 months they'd been engaged. "Explain to me what happened here. Right now." Vanessa's mouth opened and closed, searching for words that wouldn't come. She was clumsy. She spilled champagne on my dress, and I just wanted to teach her a lesson about being more careful. It wasn't. "She's bleeding," Daniel said, gesturing to Amara's raw, cracked hands. "You made a woman hold 50 pounds of ice for over an hour until her skin split open. In my house. In front of my guests. As entertainment. I didn't think it would." "You didn't think," Daniel repeated flatly. "That's the problem, isn't it? You never think about the people who aren't useful to you." The silence in the ballroom had thickened into something almost unbearable. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Someone near the back quietly slipped out a phone, though whether to record or simply to have something to do with their hands, it was impossible to say. "Daniel, please," Vanessa said, her voice dropping into something softer, more pleading, aware suddenly of how many eyes were on her. "Can we talk about this privately? This isn't the place." "You made this the place," Daniel said. "You put her on display by the door so everyone could watch. So now everyone gets to watch this too." He turned back to Amara, his voice softening entirely, the anger draining out of it and leaving something rawer underneath. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry this happened to you in my home, Because of someone I chose to bring into it. Amara, still shivering, still processing the whiplash of the last 5 minutes. From humiliation to recognition to this strange, overwhelming moment of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in 11 months of working in that house. Didn't know what to say. I just want to go home, she finally whispered. Not like this, Daniel said. Not after everything. Please, let me help you first. Let me finally do what my mother always wanted to do. He helped her to her feet, wrapped his own suit jacket around her shivering shoulders, and began leading her toward the private wing of the house, away from the stairs, away from the ice water still pooled on the marble floor, away from Vanessa, who stood frozen in the middle of her own engagement party, watching the life she'd built on cruelty begin, finally, to crumble. The private study where Daniel brought her was warm, quiet, and worlds away from the noise of the ballroom. A fire crackled in the hearth. He sat Amara down in a leather chair close to the flames, wrapped a wool blanket around her, and immediately called for the house's medical kit and warm water to help her hands. You don't have to do this, Amara said quietly, watching him kneel in front of her, gently examining the cracked, reddened skin on her fingers. I'm just staff. This isn't your job. You're not just staff, Daniel said firmly, not looking up from her hands. You're the reason I still have a mother's memory that includes birthdays, graduations, weddings. Every good year we had after that fire, we had because of what you did. Do you understand that? Every single one of those years exists because of you. Amara felt her throat tighten. She had thought about that night occasionally over the years, mostly in passing, a strange memory tucked away, never something she dwelled on. She had never once imagined it would circle back to her like this, 20 years later, in the last place she expected. How did your mother pass? She asked softly. Cancer, Daniel said. 4 years ago. She fought it for 2 years. Near the end, she made me promise that if I ever found the woman who saved her, I would make sure she knew what it meant. I've carried your photo in my wallet since the funeral. I never thought I'd actually find you. He pulled his wallet from his jacket pocket, the jacket now around Amara's shoulders, and produced a small, worn photograph, its edges soft from years of handling. He held it out to her. Amara stared down at the blurry image of herself at 19, helping load a stranger into an ambulance. Her face turned slightly toward the camera she hadn't even noticed at the time. I remember that night like it was yesterday, she said quietly. I remember thinking if I stop to think about how dangerous this is, I'm going to freeze. So I just didn't stop. I just moved. You saved her life, Daniel said. And tonight my fiancé nearly ended yours over spilled champagne. The weight of that statement settled over both of them. Why do you work here? Daniel asked gently. If you don't mind me asking. Amara let out a small, tired breath. My mother needed knee surgery last year. We don't have great insurance. My brother's in community college, first in our family to go. I finished nursing school, but between paying off my own loans and helping my family, I needed steady income fast. This job paid well, better than most entry-level nursing positions in the area, and it came with housing assistance. So I took it. I figured I'd do a year, save what I could, and go back to nursing after. You're a nurse, Daniel said, something shifting in his expression. Trained as one, Amara said. Never got the chance to really practice. The timing never worked out. Daniel was quiet for a moment, studying her, something forming behind his eyes that Amara couldn't quite read. Tonight, he said slowly, changes some things. I need you to know that whatever happens moving forward, whatever I decide about Vanessa, about this house, about tonight, none of it is a debt I'm trying to repay quickly and move on from. This isn't charity. This is just right. Finally doing what should have been done 20 years ago. Before Amara could respond, there was a knock at the study door. One of the house staff members, an older woman named Rosa, who had worked for the Hartwell family for nearly 15 years, stepped inside, her face pale. Mr. Hartwell, Rosa said carefully. Miss Cole is asking to speak with you. She says it's urgent. And, sir, some of the guests are asking questions. A few have already left. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, exhaling. The party he had spent months and a small fortune planning was unraveling in real time. Guest by guest, phone camera by phone camera. Tell Vanessa I'll speak with her in a moment, he said. Then he turned back to Amara. Will you be all right if I step out for a few minutes? Amara nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I'll be fine. But as Daniel walked toward the door, Rosa lingered for a moment, glancing at Amara with an expression of quiet, complicated recognition. I saw what happened tonight, Rosa said softly, once Daniel had left the room. I should have said something. I should have stopped it. I'm sorry I didn't. It's okay, Amara said, though the exhaustion in her voice suggested it wasn't, not entirely. It's not okay, Rosa said. But I promise you after tonight things are going to be different around here. I've worked in this house a long time. I've never seen Mr. Hartwell look at anyone the way he just looked at you. Back in the ballroom, chaos had settled into something quieter but far more dangerous. The kind of tense, whispering quiet that spreads faster than shouting ever could. Vanessa had retreated to a corner near the dessert table, her composure cracking at the edges as she fielded concerned questions from friends and family who had witnessed the entire scene. Her mother, Diane Cole, had pulled her aside, her voice sharp with a mixture of concern and calculation. What were you thinking? Diane hissed. Do you have any idea how this looks? There were reporters here tonight, Vanessa. Actual press, covering the engagement of one of the most talked-about businessmen in New England. And you humiliated a member of his staff in front of all of them. I didn't know she was connected to his family, Vanessa snapped back, though even she could hear how weak the excuse sounded. It's not like this changes anything. She's still just a maid. She's not just a maid anymore, is she? Dan said coldly. Not after what Daniel just said in front of 300 people. Nearby, Brittany stood with a small cluster of Vanessa's friends, no longer laughing, her earlier amusement replaced with a nervous, uncertain energy as she realized the scene she'd casually mocked 20 minutes ago had turned into the biggest scandal of the year. This is insane, Brittany muttered to no one in particular. It was just ice. It's not like we knew. You knew she was bleeding, one of the other friends said quietly, an edge of judgment finally creeping into her voice now that social consequences were on the line. You literally said she'll live, and walked away. The mood in the ballroom had shifted entirely. What had started as a glittering celebration of wealth and status was quickly becoming something closer to a public reckoning. Guests whispering behind champagne flutes, a few already discreetly requesting their coats from the staff near the entrance. When Daniel returned to the ballroom, the orchestra had stopped playing entirely, the musicians unsure whether to continue given the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. He walked to the center of the room, and though he hadn't planned on making any kind of speech, the weight of every eye on him made it clear that some kind of address was expected, demanded even. I want to apologize, Daniel said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom, to every one of you who witnessed what happened here tonight, and especially to the woman who endured it. What happened to Amara in my home at my party is something I take full responsibility for. Not because I ordered it, but because I built a house where someone felt they had the power to do it, and no one felt safe enough to stop them. He paused, glancing toward the corner where Vanessa stood, her face a mixture of humiliation and barely contained anger. 20 years ago, Daniel continued, a stranger saved my mother's life during a house fire. She never gave her name. My mother spent the rest of her life hoping to find her and thank her properly. Tonight, I found out that woman has been working in my own home for almost a year, and instead of gratitude, she received cruelty. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some guests exchanging shocked glances, beginning to understand the full scale of what had unfolded. I don't know exactly what happens next, Daniel admitted, his voice quieter now, more personal. "But I know it doesn't involve pretending tonight was a small mistake. And it doesn't involve continuing an engagement built on the kind of cruelty I witnessed by that door an hour ago." Every head in the ballroom turned toward Vanessa. Her face had drained of color entirely. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling, stepping forward. "You can't be serious. You're going to end our engagement over a maid. Over some woman you barely even know." "I know her better than you think," Daniel said quietly. "And I think deep down I've known for a while that you and I want very different things from the people around us. Tonight just made it impossible to keep pretending otherwise." The room held its breath. Vanessa opened her mouth to argue further, but something in Daniel's expression, calm, resolute, entirely unmoved by her usual tactics of tears and charm, told her there was nothing left to say that would change his mind. The days following the gala moved quickly, each one bringing a new wave of consequences neither Amara nor Vanessa could have fully anticipated. By morning, video clips from the party, recorded quietly on a few guests' phones, had made their way online. A grainy 30-second clip showing Amara, soaked and shivering, holding the ice sculpture while guests looked on, spread across social media with a speed that surprised even seasoned publicists. The caption accompanying most reposts was simple: "Billionaire's fiancé forces Maid to hold ice sculpture for hours, then he finds out who she really saved." Within 48 hours, the story had been picked up by local news stations, then national outlets, each one adding their own dramatic framing to what had happened. Reporters camped briefly outside the Hartwell estate gates, hoping for statements. Daniel's PR team scrambled to manage the fallout, though privately, Daniel found himself less concerned with managing his public image and more consumed with something else entirely: making sure Amara was okay. He had insisted, against her initial protests, that she take paid leave to recover, both physically and emotionally, from what had happened. Her hands had healed within a week under proper medical care, though the ordeal had left a lingering stiffness in her fingers that would take longer to fade. More than the physical injury, though, Daniel found himself troubled by something Amara had said to him during a quiet conversation on her second day of recovery, sitting in the same study where he had first tended to her hands. "I've spent 11 months in that house," she told him, staring into the fire. "And until that night, I don't think a single guest ever looked at me like I was a person. Not once. I got used to it. I stopped expecting anything different. That's the part that scares me. Not what Vanessa did, but how normal it had started to feel." Her words stayed with him long after she'd said them. Vanessa, meanwhile, had retreated to her family's home in Greenwich, issuing a brief statement through a publicist expressing regret for any misunderstanding that had occurred at the party. Language so carefully vague it satisfied no one and angered many who had actually witnessed the cruelty firsthand. Her social circle, quick to abandon anyone who became a liability, began distancing themselves within days. Event invitations dried up. A modeling contract she'd been quietly negotiating fell through, the brand citing alignment concerns in a diplomatically worded email. The engagement was formally called off within the week, announced through a brief, professional statement from Daniel's office. After careful reflection, Daniel Hartwell and Vanessa Cole have mutually decided to end their engagement. Mr. Hartwell asks for privacy for all involved during this time. There was nothing mutual about it, and most people who had followed the story knew it. But Daniel had no interest in dragging the situation out further through public statements. He simply wanted it over, so he could focus on the thing that had actually mattered to him since that night, making things right as completely as he could, for the woman his mother had spent her final years hoping to find. "I want to do something," he told Amara during one of their conversations that week, "and I need you to actually let me, instead of telling me it's too much." "What did you have in mind?" Amara asked warily, having already turned down his initial offer of a significant financial gift, uncomfortable with the idea of being paid off for what had happened. "You said you trained as a nurse but never got to practice," Daniel said. "I want to fund your certification renewal, cover any remaining costs from nursing school, and connect you with a position at Newport General. No strings, no obligation to stay working for my family in any capacity. Just the chance to finally do the work you actually trained for." Amara stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign that this was performative, some kind of guilt-driven gesture meant to smooth over the scandal for the cameras. But there were no cameras in that study. No reporters. Just the quiet crackle of the fire and a man who seemed, for the first time since she'd met him, entirely sincere. "Why does this matter so much to you?" she asked softly. "Because my mother spent the last years of her life wishing she could do exactly this," Daniel said. "And I'm not going to waste the chance she never got." 3 months passed. Amara started her position in the emergency department at Newport General in early spring, the nervous energy of her first shift back in scrubs a welcome contrast to the quiet dread she'd carried during her final months at the Hartwell estate. The work was demanding. Long hours, high stress, the constant weight of other people's worst days resting on her shoulders, but it was hers, earned through years of training that had finally found its purpose. Her mother's knee had healed well after the surgery, largely thanks to the medical fund Daniel had quietly set up alongside Amara's nursing costs, an offer Amara had only accepted after weeks of insistence and the clear understanding that it came with no conditions attached. Her brother Marcus had finished his first year of community college with strong enough grades to transfer into a 4-year nursing program himself, inspired, he admitted sheepishly, by watching his sister finally step into the career she'd worked so hard for. Daniel, for his part, had spent those same 3 months quietly rebuilding, not just his public image, though that had certainly stabilized once the initial scandal faded from headlines, but something more personal. He had begun donating substantially to burn victim support programs and volunteer firefighter training funds throughout Rhode Island, a tribute to both his mother's memory and the stranger who had once run into a burning house without a second thought. He and Amara had stayed in touch throughout those months, first through occasional check-ins about her nursing certification progress, then through longer conversations that had little to do with logistics at all. Coffee, initially framed as a simple thank you, became a semi-regular occurrence. Then dinner. Then long walks along the Newport waterfront where conversation flowed easily, without the weight of employer and employee, without the shadow of what had happened at that gala hanging over every interaction. Neither of them rushed to name what was happening between them. Both carried a quiet awareness of how it might look to outsiders, the wealthy businessman and the maid he'd rescued from his own fiancée's cruelty, a narrative almost too neat, too fairy tale, to be taken seriously by a public still watching closely for any sign of scandal. But alone, away from headlines and assumptions, what grew between them felt far simpler than any narrative could capture. It was 2 people who had each, in their own way, spent years being underestimated. Amara as invisible help in a house full of wealth, Daniel as a grieving son carrying a promise he feared he'd never fulfill, finding an unexpected kind of recognition in each other. "I used to think that photo in my wallet was the closest I'd ever get to actually thanking you," Daniel admitted one evening in early June, the 2 of them sitting on a bench overlooking the water, the sun setting in long orange streaks across the harbor. "I carried it for 4 years assuming it would just stay a photo. A reminder of someone I'd never actually get to properly thank. And now?" Amara asked. "Now I get to know the person behind it," Daniel said. "And somehow, that person is even more remarkable than the story I built up in my head all those years." Amara felt her cheeks warm, though whether from the compliment or the setting sun, she couldn't quite say. "I never wanted recognition for that night," she said. "I still don't really. I just did what needed to be done." "I know," Daniel said. "That's exactly why it matters so much." By late summer, the story of the Hartwell Gala had largely faded from headlines, replaced by newer scandals, newer stories competing for the public's short attention span. But for those who had followed it closely, an update quietly circulated that felt, to many, like the closing chapter of something they'd been rooting for without quite realizing it. Daniel Hartwell had announced the launch of the Elaine Hartwell Foundation, named after his late mother, dedicated to funding nursing scholarships for students from low-income families across Rhode Island and Massachusetts. A program conceived, he explained in a brief statement, in honor of my mother's belief that kindness should never go unrecognized, and inspired by someone who reminded me what that kindness actually looks like in practice. Amara had been present at the foundation's launch event, though notably not as a guest of honor or a headline speaker, a role she had firmly declined, uncomfortable with the idea of her story becoming a permanent public spectacle. Instead, she had simply stood quietly near the back of the small gathering, watching as Daniel spoke about his mother, about the fire, about the promise he'd made and finally, imperfectly fulfilled. After the event, as the small crowd dispersed into the warm evening air outside the community center where the launch had taken place, Daniel found Amara near the parking lot, the string lights above casting a soft glow across the quiet moment between them. "You didn't have to come tonight," he said. "I know you didn't want the attention. I wanted to be here for you," Amara said simply. "This isn't about attention. It's about your mother. About what she wanted." Daniel studied her for a long moment, something in his expression shifting into a kind of quiet certainty that had been building slowly over the past several months. "Amara," he said, "I've thought a lot about what I want to say to you, and I keep coming back to something simple. My mother spent years searching for a way to properly thank you for saving her life. What she never got the chance to say is something I think about every day now. And it's this: you didn't just save her that night. You've kind of been saving this family ever since, in ways none of us expected. Including me." Amara felt her throat tighten, the weight of the past year, the exhaustion of that gala night, the slow rebuilding that followed, the unexpected tenderness that had grown between them, settling into something she finally allowed herself to fully feel. "I never wanted to be anyone's savior," she said softly. "I just wanted to do right by people. That's all I've ever wanted." "I know," Daniel said. "And somehow, that's exactly what makes you extraordinary." Neither of them said anything else for a long moment, the quiet comfortable rather than uncertain, two people who had found each other through the strangest, most painful circumstances now standing on the other side of it, uncertain of exactly what came next, but certain at least, that they wanted to find out together. A year after that New Year's Eve gala, Amara stood in a different ballroom, in a different dress. Not ivory silk chosen to impress 300 strangers, but a simple, elegant blue gown chosen because it made her feel like herself. The occasion wasn't a party thrown to display wealth. It was the second annual fundraising gala for the Elaine Hartwell Foundation. And this time, Amara wasn't standing by the door holding anything heavier than a glass of sparkling cider. She was standing beside Daniel, his hand resting gently at the small of her back as he introduced her. Not as staff, not as a footnote in a scandal that had once dominated headlines, but simply warmly as the woman he loved. The foundation had, in its first year, funded full nursing scholarships for 11 students across 2 states, several of whom were present that evening, young women and men who had grown up in circumstances not unlike Amara's own, working hard, stretched thin, chasing a dream that often felt just out of financial reach. Rosa, the housekeeper who had once quietly apologized to Amara in that study, was there too, no longer an employee but a guest, having retired earlier that year with a generous pension Daniel had insisted on providing, a small gesture of gratitude for years of loyal, often thankless service. Vanessa's name rarely came up anymore, though occasionally it surfaced in passing conversation, a distant footnote to a story that had, in the end, redirected itself toward something far more meaningful than the cruelty that had briefly defined it. She had moved to New York, according to the last anyone had heard, working to rebuild a career and reputation that had never fully recovered from that single devastating night, a consequence not of one bad decision alone, but of a pattern of cruelty that had simply, finally, been witnessed by the right person at the right time. As the evening wound down, Daniel took the small stage set up near the dessert table, notably free of any ice sculptures this year, a detail Amara had gently insisted on with a small, knowing smile, and addressed the room one final time. "A year ago," he said, Something happened in my home that I'm not proud of. Cruelty was allowed to happen because silence made it easy. But out of that night came something my mother spent years hoping for. The chance to properly thank the woman who saved her life. And what I didn't expect, what none of us could have expected, was that thanking her would lead me to falling in love with her. A soft murmur of warmth moved through the crowd, several guests reaching for tissues, others simply smiling at the two of them standing together. My mother used to tell me that kindness doesn't ask for anything in return, and that's exactly what makes it powerful, Daniel continued. Amara never wanted recognition. She never wanted any of this. But I think sometimes the universe finds a way to return kindness to the people who give it most freely, even when they never ask for it back. He turned to Amara, his eyes soft with an emotion that needed no further explanation. So thank you, he said quietly, for saving my mother, for reminding me what actual strength looks like, and for giving this family, and now this foundation, a second chance to be better than we were. If there's one thing this story reminds us, it's this. Kindness rarely announces itself. It doesn't wait for cameras or recognition. It simply shows up quietly in the moments that matter most. And sometimes years later it finds its way back to you in ways you never could have imagined. Amara never set out to be anyone's hero. She just did what she believed was right twice 20 years apart, without expecting anything in return. And in the end, that quiet, consistent goodness became the very thing that changed her entire life. If this story touched you tonight, take a moment to hit that like button. It truly helps this channel keep telling stories like this one. Subscribe if you'd love more emotional, heartwarming stories like Amara's. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that kindness always finds its way back around, share this with them tonight. Thank you for staying until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.